Hello. Welcome back to another episode. It's been a couple of weeks. We took a bit of a summer break. I know some of the kids, including mine, are home from school. So, hello to everyone that's got kids running around at home for the first time in a while. Um, we wanted to do sort of a generalist episode today, reviewing some of the changes and some of the federal policies specific to Canada, as well some of the things that are noteworthy in the U.S. and offer our perspective from an SMB viewpoint. And starting off, there was a story that I wanted to talk about that's local to me in Calgary, which was essentially a startup that was a leader for all intents and purposes in robotics. And for the last almost 10 years, they've been making quite a bit of inroads in terms of funding and presumably getting customer trials going. And they announced on June 30th that they were suddenly essentially going bust. They sent a letter, an email out to employees, roughly 300 people, saying they're filing for bankruptcy and don't go into the office. So I thought it would be sort of an interesting topic to tie back to something we've talked about in the past, which is the extent to which, first of all, there's an opportunity for Canadian technology businesses to succeed, or leaders to succeed. And secondly, how much potential of a death knell there is when you start getting into the cycle of federal grants and federal funding, because there's no question that they were recipient of a large number of public, we'll call them public money investments or program subsidies, upwards of, I think they raised somewhere around 150 million US, so well over 200 million Canadian. And again, they weren't able to make it work. They had a couple large trials, one of which actually led to litigation with a large retailer, which obviously isn't something that you want to see. But yeah, I think it's just an interesting point in time to sort of reflect and say, what without knowing a whole bunch of internal details, what are our perspectives on companies that are purported to be, the best that the country has to offer, and when they clearly run into headwinds and they run out of money, what potential lessons could be learned, and how do we parlay those for ourselves going forward? So I guess off the top, Mike, Andrew, any sort of thoughts or comments when you hear that kind of news?
Yeah, I think it comes back to business fundamentals. Business fundamentals is, you know, churning a profit, getting the business to a point of profitability. Obviously, the time horizon on that is a little bit longer on a startup or a company that is heavily invested in building technology or building, in this case, hardware, robotics. So there's a lot of upfront costs there. So I understand it's unrealistic to expect a company like that to be at a point of profitability early on. But that has to always be the fundamentals that the business is based on. There has to be a clear path, and the more that growth is subsidized, or subsidized through equity, selling off of shares, but more importantly, taking debt on or taking government grants, the more that business is creates instability, because now it's reliant on servicing this debt or getting to a point where it can operate profitably without the subsidy, without these government grants. So I think what's important, and we've faced this ourselves, is always building a business that, yes, you have to finance the J curve, but it has to be a clear and defined plan to get to self-sustained profitability. But that's my take on it.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I think part of the issue and part of the problem is this public grants and funding. I think the essentially, you look at Silicon Valley, you look at some of these tech center around the world, they bring in a lot of private money, venture capital money, where these venture capital have LPs to answer to. It forces them to make better judgments and essentially better investments in startups. So I think part of the problem is, we're trying to create this tech innovation hub in Canada, funding it with public money, with taxpayers' money. I don't think it's going to work because essentially there's no skin in the game for the people that are deploying these type of capital, right? Whereas LPs and venture capitalists, they are looking for some sort of return. It forces the startup to perform in order to raise the next round of capital. If I'm getting free money from the government as a form in the form of a grant to operate and scale my business, what incentive do I have? Probably nothing, right? Like, you know, so I think that's what makes Silicon Valley so successful, right? Is the amount of venture capital money that flows in there, and to build up that innovation hub is people are taking risk, and when people are taking risk, they take more essentially a more conservative approach to investment, and they're not going to lose it. So they tend to invest in unicorn. That's what everybody's after. But if it's just I don't know, like a government bank or whatever, the incentive may not be there.
Does anyone want to
Yeah.
explain the concept of smart money as well? Smart money taking on smart money. Does anyone want to dive into that?
Well, I guess I think we would probably have different interpretations, but essentially you're bringing people into the fold or putting people on your cap table or on your board that are not there for the money. They're there to essentially help build the business and bridge gaps and connections and stuff like that.
Exactly. So that's another thing. Like Andrew's given that example of Silicon Valley and private equity and VC money. A lot of times that's smart money. It comes with advisory. It comes with economies of scale. They have connections with other vendors, other suppliers, potential customers. A lot of times they'll actually bring customers to the firms they're investing in. So not only are they getting capital in which that company needs to show return on, they're also getting the advisorship coming. They're getting people that are coming onto the board that are seasoned, that have experience running these large companies or scaling out these successful companies. So that's coming as well, where you're not getting that on the public side.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree with both of you. I think one thing, the additional sort of point of context that I think is important in this story is that they were doing hardware, and hardware is incredibly capital intensive. Like I've taken a run at it before, and it's very, very challenging because you essentially need to raise enough money to develop and build equipment, hardware, just to have a shot at ever validating it. And I think I definitely understand the path that they've taken, especially again leaning on a lot of Canadian federal paths, a lot of grants, a lot of strategic partnerships, and there's no question that it sounds like one of the paths, one of the grant paths that they took helped connect them to customers that they were able to do trials with. Now, I think taking a pessimist view, they had been around for a large number, almost 10 years from my information. And they've done a Series C, they've raised a lot of money. And what you would typically expect to see by that point in time is not only is obviously the technology built, but within a first couple customer, trials, you should be able to validate or not what is happening. And it's a question of like if they had gone out to market. So from what I can see, they haven't raised since 2022, and so if they had attempted to raise money between 2022 and now, to your point about the valley, like their main concern is the ability to generate revenue, right? And regardless of the dollar value, like if you can show them that you can make money doing something, there's typically funding available. And so the reality that they continue to go back to the grant path, or the Canadian, let's call it the Canadian centric model, which is definitely harder to raise money, suggests that they just weren't getting the commercial traction that they could or that they needed in order to get that VC stuff. So I understand. Like I think from if I were to do it again, or if I were to sort of advise myself, that try and get the money that you would need from the grants in order to validate the technology, like get it past the sort of starting line, and then do what you need to do to make it a business, like Michael's saying. Because if you don't, there's absolutely no way you can, unless you can obviously make money profitability wise, which is almost impossible, especially when you're competing with large incumbents. But maybe they just couldn't get the commercial traction that they were hoping for, and they just, again, the money ran out. So yeah,
In any
it's
case,
a tough one.
in any case, definitely a very unfortunate story. So we don't like to hear stuff like that. So our heart goes out to those individuals that work there, that started that organization. It's never easy. And talking about that, I think this will lead into, I think we should talk about the economy here in Canada. We're into the summer months now. We're just getting into summer. I think there's the last Bank of Canada interest rate release was in June. That was, they held rates at 4.75%. And there's going to be another release coming in the fall. And just so everyone knows that was, I think, the first drop we had in interest rates since March of 2020 was just before June, if I'm not mistaken, right? Just before June we had a minor drop, which was the first one since March of 2020. So I think we should talk about, what the Bank of Canada is going to do. There's talk about the Bank of Canada dropping interest rates at the next release. So I'd like to talk about how that'll have an impact on Canadians and Canadian business owners. Also, let's talk about inflation. Inflation, another thing, is at 2.9% as of June. However, we're experiencing a phenomenon called sticky inflation. And what sticky inflation is when basically you're seeing a higher level of inflation on certain essential goods, such as food, energy. As of now, like, even though Canada's inflation is at 2.9%, that's relatively low to what we're actually seeing at the grocery stores, seeing on our energy bills, seeing when we get our insurance renewals. Like, we all know, we're in insurance. Insurance, especially personal insurance, is up double digits. Personal insurance is up double digits. Energy's up huge, almost double digits as well, close to. Groceries are up, I think, by about 9% right now. So with inflation where it is, especially the sticky inflation, and interest rates potentially dropping, what do we foresee for the third quarter? Uh, you know, third quarter here in Canada.
So just to clarify, Mike, the rates right now are at 2.75, 2.75. So they've been dropping since this time last year. So they started cutting in June of 2024. And what I think is happening is they're going to have to continue. Well, they've been reticent to drop them too aggressively because, like you say, inflation is still high. But what I think we're seeing is that our economy is so heavily driven by real estate, both construction, new construction, as well as just trading of existing, especially homes. I read a really interesting piece last couple of weeks ago that was talking about how, despite the fact that rates have dropped, we still aren't seeing the equivalent mortgage payment come back to something that people essentially believe to be affordable. And so what the prediction is that we're going to still see minimal activity. So from the large markets, activity has been pretty poor. There hasn't been a lot of homes trading hands, and listings are down, sales are down, all that kind of stuff. And the prediction was essentially that that's not going to change until the actual mortgage rates themselves. And again, that follows Bank of Canada rate prime typically, but depending on the value of the property in combination with the rate, that will give you your typical monthly payment. And so the prediction is that until rates or home values drop, we're just not going to see any sort of activity. And that includes investment in new builds, that includes hiring, that includes all the suppliers that go into real estate. So it's kind of having a knock-on effect in that industry.
And thanks for correcting me. Did I say 4.75? I apologize. I meant 2.75. Sorry.
Right.
I was like, 4.75.
Yeah,
What do I miss
yeah,
here? What's going
that's
on?
high.
Well, Mike's probably thinking mortgage rates, usually prime plus two, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Or minus. I got 5 years ago when I renewed most recently, I was kicking myself that I didn't do fixed because they were offering prime less one. And like, again,
Good.
back in the heyday, like when rates were 2%, anyways, shoulda, coulda, woulda.
Well, the thing is, I think home prices are not going to drop. Let's be realistic. The cost of construction is going up. So really, it's going to be difficult, right? Like, I think that's the part of the challenge here is that how can you expect home prices to drop if the cost of construction of these homes are going up?
And the permitting costs too. How the
Yeah,
permitting costs, the
permitting
land
costs.
costs.
Yeah, there's so much cost and fees, red tape, all this stuff that's happening is inflating the cost of construction for a whole new home. So until that drops, so you're expecting for a lot of things to drop, like cost of construction to drop lower, and value of the home to drop as a result. That's that I think is going to be challenging.
So this creates upward pressure though on Canadian small businesses. Because if that's the case, if inflation is up and cost of homes is not dropping, and interest rates are already pretty low to be honest. Like what's it at in the U.S.? Like 2.75 is pretty low. I think it's much higher in the U.S.
Yeah,
The
let me
Federal
check. I think it's
Reserve.
about 4.
What a difference. But what does that mean for wages? Like, for an average Canadian to be able to afford to live in anywhere near an economic core, what do wages need to be at for that individual? And
Um,
can companies afford to pay that level of wage and still turn a profit?
that's a good question, and I think what we see is that you're going to see the competition for work heats up as well as immigration continue to increase in Canada. So if the economic outlook for Canada is on a decline, less jobs, more people, that just means supply and demand, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's there's going to be a lot of people looking for work, and it's just the unemployment is going to look terrible.
Yeah, and a lot of the immigration that's coming in historically hasn't necessarily been skilled labor. There hasn't been a high percentage, from my understanding, of skilled labor coming into the country. So there still is a lot of need for those skilled jobs. So with that being said, it just supports what you're saying, Andrew, where because the demand in this is there and the supply isn't necessarily there, it's just putting pressure on
Yeah, putting
higher
pressure.
wages.
Yeah, higher wages because you need to have, instead of a company. Now, essentially, I look at the wage, the average wage in Canada. Like you look at it as a business owner, we face this all the time. Is we have to take a bet on an individual, and if the cost of betting on an individual is going up, we have very little room to be flexible. Like I'll give you an example. Walmart used to hire like these greeters. They're older individuals. They stand and they just greet people for minimum wage, but that cost no longer makes sense. So all those people are going to lose their job, right? So it's just companies don't have wiggle room anymore. Right. So when they hire someone, they rather hire someone who can do multiple things or can extract more out of the individual.
Yeah. No, so small businesses for sure. But are you seeing this, Andrew and Kyle, on larger businesses as well? Like when you're competing for talent, are you finding that some of the larger players are overpaying and basically some of the smaller size businesses are having a difficult time attracting talent because they can't outpay the larger players?
So I'll chime in on the technology, the development side. So we haven't been looking for people actively in the last, let's say, year and a bit, but there's no question that the market is really soft for tech talent. And I think a lot of that is driven by the focus of large technology providers like Microsoft, for example. I think is this month or last month announced 9,000 layoffs. And at the same time, you've got companies like Meta that are acquiring and poaching AI research talent from OpenAI and offering them what has been reported as upwards of $100 million pay packages. So there's a real reshuffling of talent aboard some of these large companies and directing that the focus to AI and more novel products, things that are coming down the pike that haven't been there before. And as a result, they're removing or cutting the talent that essentially isn't in vogue or isn't required anymore. And so, there's definitely a huge retrenching going on in the tech space, especially when it comes to these large software providers. I don't know where that will end up. Like, there's a lot of concerns as well with offshoring because essentially with AI tools, you're able to do a lot more. You're able to achieve a lot more productivity with less manpower. And so, if you're essentially outsourcing a job, you're able to outsource two or three jobs for that one job that's offshore. So again, it doesn't bode well where if people's margins are being squeezed, they're not, and there's not a lot of spending in the economy because people are, interest rates have gone up and their costs have gone up. It's not going to change. It's a bit of a vicious cycle. But what are your thoughts, Andrew?
Yeah, like for the tech space, I think you covered it well, Kyle. But I'm going to speak about some of the, I guess, medium-sized businesses that we're that some of our clients, for example. Like I had a conversation with a client the other day, and their business operate 24 hours a day, and they're saying how difficult it is to find people that are willing to work those off hours, right? They're going to demand more money to work those off hours. So at minimum wage you're talking about is already really high. Imagine hiring someone to work those off hours. It's going to be an enormous amount of money. So it puts a lot of pressure definitely on these small businesses, medium-sized businesses as well, because they rely a lot on the workforce, like human capital to operate their businesses. Like things like grocery stores requires a lot of people. Things like large like wholesalers, for example. They need a lot of people, and this cost is constantly going up. It's putting pressure on them because their margin is being squeezed, and they don't have the flexibility, some of the tech companies, to deploy AI solutions or robotics or anything like that, because it's not in the foreseeable future.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So the technology with AI, it is reshaping the employment landscape, and I agree with you. Like in certain industries, it's definitely having a more profound impact, especially technology. In other industries, it's having a big impact on kind of like that lower level um, staffing. More of the admin, more of that sort of like people that are moving processes along, things that can be easily replaced by AI. So yes, we're seeing already a lot of things alluding to that AI is going to take over these jobs, which will in turn uh, we think boost companies' profit margins, because now they can eliminate a lot of redundant roles in the organization. However, the way I look at it is it's also going to create some sort of pressure on organizations as well, because now organizations will be focused on key talent. So, they're going to trim a lot of the fat, but now the employees that they do hire, they're going to be very selective and ensure they're getting very highly skilled, high talent individuals. Andrew, you even talk about this all the time, like being really good at your job. So, and they're going to be willing to pay more for these people. Because now, if they've just saved, say, a couple $100,000 getting rid of all the clerks, they're gonna want to spend that money now, or deploy some of that money towards ensuring that they keep some of their top level talent, like their legal team, their lawyers, some of the lawyers that are generating a lot. I'm just using an example that generate a lot of business for the firm, that actively bring in business. They're going to have to prioritize those individuals now. And a lot of companies are going to be hunting for the smaller, more talented talent pool. And it's going to be, I foresee it being very competitive to get highly skilled people, because everyone's going to want them.
Yeah, and you're going to start seeing companies invest more in automation because that lowers their costs and increases their margin, right? Like we're seeing a lot of self-checkout, for example, right? We're seeing a lot of like a lot of those self-checkout where you're not dealing with anybody, right? Or was it something you buy on your phone and you pick it up, right? So you don't interact with anybody. So I think a lot of these things, the companies are going to start to look for ways to deploy some of these things because the cost of hiring people is so expensive. And like that leads to what you're saying, Mike. If I'm a company, I'm gonna look for individuals that are talented, that are capable of doing multiple things, that I can extract the most value out of them, right? So I'm going to take less risk as a business owner, because if you're, say, a certain age or something, you may not want to take that certain risk, right? Like to bring on someone who you have to train up. It just brings in a lot of issues, and I think it's just causing employment to be a lot more difficult because you're competing with so many factors. You're AI, you're competing with robotics, machines. It's yeah.
But again, we've talked about this before, and I don't think that that's going to change anytime soon. Like I think Mike's on the right track in the sense that I think people are already trying to automate a lot of the low, let's call them low skill, high volume tasks. So like call centers and stuff like that. There's no question that a large segment of the creative industries have been totally disrupted. Like we've got friends that are in marketing and content generation and stuff like that, and like illustrations and like creating dossiers and like any sort of graphic arts type stuff, it's fallen off a cliff because the AI tools are so available and cheap and easy to use, and they produce actually quite good content. That's definitely not coming back anytime soon, and it's probably going to leak into movies and stuff like that. So I think a second question is if we anticipate that these businesses, and we're in the same boat, like we're trying to automate as much of that as possible as a small business, as a startup, to say what can we do today that we weren't able to do 5 years ago with the same or less amount of money, right? And the ability to increase that velocity with the same amount of capital is the name of the game. So it's I just don't see it changing anytime soon. And to Mike's point about like it's gonna start to cannibalize some of the mid-tier professionals and accountants in the first 5 years in the profession rather than the first 1 or 2 years or whatever.
Yes.
And so what this is the big conundrum with AI is when those people lose their jobs, they stop spending money or they dramatically reduce spending money, and that drags on the rest of the economy. And so what is the solution? Increasing productivity through AI is going to make the businesses more profitable potentially, but they're likely going to invest that into more automation, into increased productivity, into increased efficiency and margin. It's not going to turn into jobs, which again, I don't think is the target, but it's definitely not trending the way it did 50 years ago.
Yeah, and again, I'm going to go back to the minimum wage. I don't think that's helping either, because that's forcing businesses to now invest in automation and invest in AI and essentially become more efficient to squeeze more margin out of the business, right? So, where you think about it, like if sometimes the cost is so low to hire an individual, would I really invest in some automation? I may just utilize people. Like in some countries, they utilize a lot of people instead of machinery, right? To make up for that productivity, because their cost, their wage is so low, you might as well just pay people to do it. So it's just it's just the issue is just going to get worse and worse, like you're saying, because people are going to invest in more automation, squeeze more margin out, jobs are being lost because,
Mhm.
and if wages continue to go up, more jobs will get lost.
So let's talk about what that looks like from a practical standpoint, because Andrew and you, Kyle, you're right, and so many others that we speak to are all on this similar mind frame, and like kind of where everything is going is, hey, we're going to eke out the same amount of volume with 15-20% less bodies. So I just had this conversation with a gentleman the other day, and the same thing. He's like, hey, we're gonna do the same volume we were doing as before, if not more volume, with 15 people instead of 30 people, because they were so heavy on the admin side, so much low level stuff, low level admin that AI can replace. So what does that look like from a practical standpoint? So now these companies, okay, have 15 less people or whatever, 20, so let's say like 30% less people. Where are those people going? Like for work, where are they getting jobs? Uh, are they buying homes? Like, okay, we know that if they're not getting jobs, is unemployment going to go up? Is spending going to go up? Is this all going to trickle back into the economy? What are these people doing that no longer have these jobs that they used to be making $30, 40, $40,000 a year. Now they don't, their job's been eliminated.
That's why, I'm going to bring Elon Musk into this conversation, even though I don't want to. But he did mention the universal basic income. Because essentially these individuals are going to lose their jobs to machines, right? So you're right, Mike. Like they're not going to be able to go anywhere. Like what are you going to do? Imagine it's different if you're young, right? Like if you're like in your early 20s, late 20s, even your 30s. But like imagine someone who's like late 40s is very difficult to transition at that point.
What would you transition them to? So say you're a young individual, you're still in your late 20s, early 30s, you've been doing an admin job, data entry job, and suddenly your company has restructured, they've embedded AI, and now AI has replaced you. What do you do at that point? Do you try to pick up a skill? You try to learn a new skill? I guess you're still young enough.
Yeah, either become a plumber before machines take over those type of jobs.
So pick up a hard trade, you're saying?
Yeah, or listen, if robotics come into play, those jobs are gone too. So I have this discussion with friends all the time, and it's interesting because machines are so perfect at doing everything. I think the jobs that requires you not to be perfect are the ones that are going to be in demand. Where human imperfection is required, those are the jobs that are going to still be around.
Yeah, or there's a requirement. We've talked about this as well. Like the human trust element has to be there. It's pretty big, right? Like, brokers, stuff like that, where there's a relationship and the consumer is more interested in the relationship element than they are in the output. And,
Yes, yes.
you
That's
know,
the other
that's,
thing that can't get replaced by AI. I'm glad you brought
See,
that up.
I'm
That's the
probably
take I always.
advocate, Kyle, on that one. I think there's a slowly people are starting to trust AI a lot more.
You could trust
fair.
AI and you could like AI, but it's hard to have like a deep
But
relationship.
you have this problem, and I'll give you an example of this is becoming a big problem in the medical industry, in the medical space, is people are starting to believe AI diagnosis more than doctors, and this is creating a lot of issues with doctors because they're bringing these diagnoses to their doctor and say, hey, you know what, AI is telling me I have this problem.
But
Uh,
that's not the relationship business.
well, the doctors have the relationship, right? You've been their family doctor for years, and now they're bringing you this AI diagnosis. That's really
But they
the
still need that doctor. Like they can't replace the doctor because they
Yeah, I think you're
still want
talking
to
about
run
two
it
different
by. There's still
things.
a human in the loop. The
Yeah.
human still has to be in the loop there. If it's not like they're going to say, okay, I'm going to trust AI and take this prognosis. No, they still want to run it by their doctor because they have that relationship and trust there. Not just
If
because
they
their
have it.
doctor can fill the prescription,
if
but
they
because now there's a human there. If AI could fill the prescription, would they trust AI to do that? I think many would. You're right, but
So
not everybody. And yeah.
I think what Andrew's alluding to, which I've read similar stories about, is that there's a lack of that relationship. So these are people like I'm a perfect example. I don't have a regular GP. I haven't had a regular GP in probably 15 years. So my GP decided to focus on a different practice, specifically women's health, and so I've been essentially floating, right? And I don't have that relationship. So I would be the first person to say, "Hey, I've got something. Where do I go? I don't have a doctor. I don't have a relationship. I'm going to go to AI." And you can apply that to countries like the US where it charges you a huge amount of money to go see your doctor. Like there's no question that there's not a relationship there. And there's a long-standing concern in the medical profession that they don't take the time to build those relationships, that it
Mhm.
is just a cattle yard that you're shipped in and out, and they bill for whatever time that they spend with you. So I think you're both right. I think that in order for that human connection to be salvaged before it goes and AI becomes the norm, it needs to go to relationships because that's the only way you're going to compete with AI. But the industry itself is doing absolutely everything possible to minimize that relationship element.
Well, it's going to take time. It's going to take time, right? Like right now, you got to realize people, AI, a lot of the individuals interacting with it, haven't grown up with it. This is all very new. Even technology is new to a lot of these people. So that, that level of comfort and trust is not there. But I don't disagree with you guys that the younger generation that has been raised, interacting with AI and the next generation that's coming that they'll know no different than AI. obviously that's a different story. But it's going to take time. It's
Yeah,
going to take time.
I agree. It will take a little bit of time. Like, I mean, our generation, like, will be considered dinosaurs soon. So, no doubts, like, we'll probably still value the relationship. But yeah, the younger generation will probably be interacting with AI a lot more. So, I don't know what you guys think, but I'm thinking, like, I think I told you, Mike, is that I think sports, though, anything entertainment, any kind of sports, any kind of physical sport that where people don't want to watch some perfect thing playing basketball and it gets it in every single time. You want to watch something that's like through practice. Like this champion that like you want to watch. It's like gladiators again. Like
I
that.
agree. I agree with your point there. But not everyone can be a, professional athlete. What are people going to do? What is that law clerk that got replaced? What's she going to do?
Reality TV show. People seem to love reality TV shows. So maybe something like that. Like whereas you don't want to watch robots. Reality TV. Like maybe you want to watch some human gossip. Like those type of human elements. I think will still be around because it's just natural. Like people enjoy that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, like most of the other things that requires you to be perfect or some sort of profession that utilize information, I think those things AI is going to be capable of doing those things and is probably capable of replacing those.
Yeah. Interesting. Why don't we make a quick segue? Mike, you wanted to touch on New York.
That's very political. That that's very political. But yeah, I guess we'll just talk about it like really briefly and take a non-political stance. But the Democratic, Mandani, right? Mandani was elected recently as the Democratic mayoral representative for New York. He still hasn't been appointed the mayor. He's just the Democratic representative right now, and he surpassed it was Cuomo, right? He beat out Cuomo, who had a long-standing stint in that
Prior
in that
Governor
role.
Cuomo.
Yes, yes, the former governor Cuomo. So, kind of a big turning point for New York because this individual Mandani is his political views are extremely socialist. He's talking about like some of the things on his platform are defund the police and replace many of them with social workers in high crime areas. Talked about raising the minimum wage by I think by 3 times roughly. He talked about having government subsidized grocery stores. So
Well,
essentially
take them
20
over. So
take them
essentially
over.
open up publicly owned
Yeah.
grocers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. There you go. So like bread lines, basically. So creating bread lines, uh, and there was a few other things in his platform, but essentially a lot of the New Yorkers have really taken a liking to his platform where he's at. Oh, rent control as well is the big one. He wants to have a lot more government subsidized housing with rent control. So basically, his big thing is, hey, you know what? The younger generation, many people in New York, all generations, cannot afford to live there anymore. The cost of living has spiraled out of control. Wages aren't where they need to be for 90% of the population there. So he's saying, let's make it affordable again. Let's bring back the American dream where people can go to work and afford groceries, afford housing. However, this has many potential implications with the other with not only just the top percentile. So there's going to be a lot of individuals with high net worth that this is not going to jive with. But apparently he's got like a 75% in the polls. He's got a 75% chance of winning the race to be the elected mayor or governor.
Yeah, I find it a fascinating story. So, like you say, he's outright hardcore socialist. Like, there's all of his policies are pro-socialist. He's very, anti-capitalist, essentially saying that capitalism has failed. I think it's interesting because looking at some of the data behind the numbers, it's kind of strange. So, one thing that I found unique was a large portion of his voter base in the Democratic ticket were boomers, were not young people, and so you typically associate socialist ideals with young people who feel disenfranchised. There's actually a good email that was released or leaked between Peter Thiel and some of the board of Facebook years ago. Anyways, and they were just talking about what demographics and what to target and stuff like that. And the point that he made was that when you're young and you don't have opportunities and you can't get on the housing ladder and you can't get employed and you don't feel like society is really looking out for you, it's not a big mystery why you start to look at socialism as the answer, right? And I think he's just 100% spot on. And until we've been talking about it all day, is until cost of living becomes achievable, where people are able to get jobs that will pay a living wage, they're going to look at these sorts of characters that say, hey, we're going to fix everything. Everybody's going to get what they need. They're going to have affordable rent. They're going to have affordable food. They're going to be able to live where they want. They're not going to be broke. Like, it's incredibly appealing. And the thing that I find interesting is, again, that message has resonated with a lot of older people, which for all intents and purposes are typically the ones with the assets. They're the ones with the houses and the wealth and the ones that are standing in the way of the younger generations, achieving what they want. So that's quite interesting because, again, you typically see from our generation as well, I've never been socialist leaning. I don't really agree with a lot of the sentiment of it. And you typically see older generations drifting more conservative, more right leaning. So it's fascinating to see that economic policy like that is attracting older people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely wild, and I think it's cyclical too. Socialism is democratic, Republican. It's very cyclical. We go through these phases where, for a number of years, the country becomes very Republican, or in our case, conservative, where it's all about capitalism. Making money, making the high level of money in industrialization, and then after, what happens is if you think about it, we've been in such a period of high debt. From a country standpoint and from an individual standpoint, people are just, the cost of living has spiraled really high. People continue to take on more and more debt, and as the pressures of all that debt weigh down on them, and it's like a snowball effect. The country debt, government spending, people are taking on personal debt. They start to come back around to these, ideologies of socialism. Now it's like, okay, now I need the government to get me out of this. And what was interesting in one of the podcasts, I'm sure you listened to it as well, was they talked about student loans and how, like, the cost of an average, degree now in the U.S. has, skyrocketed, and it's all funded by debt. It's all government debt, basically, these student loans. And people are coming out of college, or university, with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt and no ability to pay that debt back. So that's where it starts, and then you buy a house, and you take on more debt. So that they're already set up to kind of like take on all this debt, and the government has been helping them. So I guess they're kind of expecting the government now to give them a solution out of this debt, because they started this relationship with the government, with their OSAP loans in here, or their government student loans.
Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, how do you explain the older generations? Like, the older generations
Yeah,
likely
that I
don't
don't
have
know.
education debt, and they
Yeah, that.
typically don't have debt at all.
Well, I'm guessing the older generation probably relies a lot on the old age security and government support. I think they're going to rely a lot more on that kind of stuff. So
We're
they,
talking about 40 to 50-year-olds. These people aren't on OAS yet.
Well, they might be approaching that where they're starting to think about it. Maybe they're approaching it and they're worried about their retirement. Like, oh my goodness, the cost of everything keeps going up. Or I need to help my children. Maybe they're thinking, I need to help my child with the student debt, or with buying. I give you a deposit for their first homes. So maybe they're thinking, like, I don't have as much built up of a nest egg as I had hoped. Especially blue collar workers. I'm sure that they don't have much of a nest egg built up. And in
so
their house, a lot of it is in their primary residence. How do you get that out? If all their money is in the house, what are they supposed to retire on?
Yeah, but
well,
that again doesn't make sense for rent controls, because a lot of those people have investments in apartments and the large REITs of the world. I find it really puzzling. Like, I could see the sort of sanctimonious, like, we're going to do it for our kids, but like, there's huge numbers behind it.
I
So
guess
it's
the income class, it comes down to the income class.
You know what's
They're,
interesting is you start to see like, and this is a question for you guys. At least from my observation, there's a lot more, socialist supporter when it comes to, those urban areas, like the more dense cities, very populated areas, like downtown Toronto, downtown New York, Vancouver. LA, San Francisco, all these major clusters. Why, what do you think? Why is there so many, socialist supporter, coming from these areas?
yeah, I think that's a great question, Andrew. Yeah, because we even saw in the last election, like if you look at those areas, it was just red, which is liberal here, equivalent to conservative in the U.S. Like, why is it so red? Why is it so liberal in those areas? Um, I think a part of it has to do with um, cost of living. Maybe the cost of that could be a small portion. I wouldn't say that's the main reason, but could a small portion be the cost of living is so much higher in those areas, so people are looking for more support, external support, or expecting it from governments? I don't know.
to be honest, like the where I've seen it most dramatically in my own personal life is I grew up in Edmonton, and Edmonton is the outlier in the province of Alberta in terms of it being very liberal or progressive leaning. And there's one district specifically that always votes, socialist party in Canada is called New Democrats. They always vote NDP or, non-conservative. And that district is known for, it's essentially the university district. And so it's got the entire community is filled with people that are, in many cases tied to post-secondary, the University of Alberta post-secondary system. It's got a lot of very progressive leaning, business culture and climate. And so, I don't doubt that that's, you know, that sort of subset of the world, it's a huge issue in universities across countries, Canada, US, where universities have essentially entrenched that very liberal, progressive, ideals. Like Zamdani's father is a professor at Columbia, right? I think both of his parents are actually academics, and they immigrated here partially because they were academics to teach. So, like I think that there's in terms of why certain areas vote the way that they do, I think it really reflects on the ideals that they're raised within. And if they're in an economy that again is primarily public sector leaning, they're going to vote for the union friendly candidate. They're going to vote for the high tax, low, uh, you know, uh, high tax, high spend, low capital sort of perspective. I think the problem that we have is that we're not, especially through universities and schools, we're not challenging that doctrine. We're producing young people, and again, this is sort of to be expected. We're producing young people that are very progressive. But,
Yeah, yeah. The
anyways,
education, I think plays a big part. Kyle's right. A lot of people that are, have a certain level of education are usually more liberal or left leaning because that's kind of what they've been indoctrinated into. And the younger generation, for the most part, is more left leaning as well. And a lot of these urban cores are filled with younger people. Think about it. As people age, they have families, their families grow. They're maybe into more rural areas, and now they're surrounded by people like Kyle mentioned with different upbringings. People that maybe have different priorities now because they have a family. But when you're young, you're in the city core, you're coming out of the education system, you're kind of in that social circle that's very indoctrinated for that left-leaning agenda. So that definitely plays into it.
yeah, and I think that not to dwell on this topic too long, but like I do think one of the things that we can all do, or at least the system can do a better job of is connecting the reality of how taxes are generated. Because I think one thing that's lost, especially with some of my friends that are nurses and teachers and so forth, is if they've only ever seen that industry, they're only ever making the connection between we need more funding and my job, right? Public funding and employment. Whereas there's no connection between like where are the taxes coming from? Where is the tax base? How do we evolve the tax base? How do we grow the tax base? How do we generate more revenue rather than, oh well, let's just tax people a lot more. Let's just tax the billionaires so there's no more billionaires so that we all have more money. I think that that's just a really broken calculation that just hasn't been challenged before.
Agreed. Agreed. Anything you want to add, Andrew, before we wrap wrap this fantastic episode up?
No, I mean that's you guys pretty much covered everything. Great.
All right, on that positive note, go out and start ideas, generate new things, bring in more people. We need people that will challenge the status quo. Like, unfortunately we've talked about a lot of downer subjects, but the
Learn how
way
to
that
play
we combat
basketball,
that.
become a pro athlete as per Andrew's recommendations.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Build tools, build the next tool, right? Like
How about
how did
pickleball?
Elon do it? He's pushing the envelope, he's finding things that people want. And so yeah, come up with some really impressive ideas and chase those dreams because
Become an expert. And we can't stress it enough. For me, become an expert in your field and focus on something where there's relationships or a manual skill tied to that. If you have a manual skill or you have something that's really driven on by relationship or you're an expert, it'll take longer for you to become relevant.
yeah, good show. All right. Thanks for joining us. Have a great week. We'll see you next time.